Hey everybody, this is Ed.
This is Deja.
This is Kara.
And this is your day's dumpster fire. Is it going to repeat? Is it going to repeat? Hey, it didn't repeat.
We did it.
We finally did it.
We did it.
Woots.
Max XP. On to the next trial.
Yeah, next step is actually like record and not have it like blow up in my face like the last episode did.
Or like it just did for me.
Oh god. Like, let me tell you guys, the last episode, because I had run into so many software issues trying to edit it. Normally, an episode takes me about 8 hours. Once we record it, it takes me about 8 hours to like edit it and get it out. I put in over 48 hours into editing the last episode of the Terra Nova freezing fire thing. And like I would finish it and then something would glitch out in the software and it would erase it or it would corrupt the file. And then I have to go back and do it all over again.
I'm sorry for your loss.
Oh, yeah. That's 48 hours of my life I'll never get back.
Yeah.
Absolutely rage-inducing.
Yeah. Well.
Which is funny because that's not even the trash can fire.
I mean, it could have been. But yeah. What's the trash can fire for today?
What's the trash can fire, Ed?
Oh, you know. You know, Deja, good and full and well what this is. The three of us are running a summer camp at our school, and we are utilizing Deja's classroom for the summer camp. And anybody who knows anything about a Montessori classroom, they're real big on having like living critters in there. Like, for example, like Kara and I, we have like a parakeet. We'll have a rabbit in there. We have 2 aquariums. We have a leopard gecko and all sorts of stuff. Well, Deja has a bearded dragon named Albus, which is kind of cool. He just sits there and does his own thing. And then she has a demon spider from the 7th Inner Circle of Hell.
Who is also very precious and sweet.
Yes, it's a tarantula. And you really should have named it Shelub.
I wanted to name him Franklin. I was outnumbered, and we named him Webbs. So
yeah, but
I thought Franklin was great. Webbs is better. Spider-Man was completely out of the question.
Not even Spider-Pig?
No. I said, actually, no. I said Spider-Pig, and they're like, no. I'm like, y'all need to grow up, honestly.
That's offensive. I was looking at Shelub from like Lord of the Rings, like Shelub's lair, the thing that stabs Frodo in the stomach and wraps him up, and it's based off of a giant tarantula.
I thought it would be clever. I can never remember the name of the big spider in Harry Potter.
Oh yeah,
it would go pretty okay with Albus. I'm just saying, the bearded dragon.
Yeah, that would be fitting. And actually, when I look back at it, Webbs isn't a bad name either, because I think that was the name of the spider from Donkey Kong Country.
He's like, it's not that bad because it's named after a video game guy. It's fine.
Yeah, because like there was, I think it was Webbs where like you become this little spider and it shoots out like these little web platforms that you can jump on. But and I think it was from Donkey Kong Country too.
What happened to the spider?
My sweet spider.
Yeah, so basically I was trusted to be alone with these kids. And obviously the first rule of thumb whenever you're watching kids is don't let anything bad happen to the kids. That's right. Safety is number one around these kids. The other thing is like try not to let the kids like accidentally do something bad to the critters. And so we had one boy. And I'm really proud of him because this boy, he's a lot like me, wants nothing to do with spiders, but he was brave enough to like actually pick this thing up and like hold it in his hand, and he had it for quite some time. But of course, complete pandemonium. I'm in there by myself. I have no idea what I'm doing. And then next thing I know, the spider is splattered on the ground. And it turns out that the boy thought like it had pooped on him or peed on him and whatnot. And he flinched. And it's an honest to goodness mistake. I think if anybody in that room, save for maybe Matthew, if anybody in that room had that spider on their hand and they saw it do something weird, they would have just immediately flinched and dropped it.
I agree. I'm going to say that this student, he was also my student all year. So I know him, and I know that it wasn't something ever to be intentional, and it was a genuine reaction.
Yeah.
I don't want to blame you either, because everybody makes mistakes and you have to learn from that. Just kidding. No, I am actually really proud of him, because he did face a little bit of his own fear. I knew that he is a little bit afraid, and I'm genuinely shocked and surprised and happy that he conquered a little bit of a fear and held him, even for this tiniest thought of wanting to hold him. That's great.
Yeah.
So,
and he was holding him for, I would say, like between 5 and 10 minutes. Like, that's 5 to 10 minutes longer than I would hold out.
I mean, I'm surprised you've been in the room for longer than 5 to 10 minutes, because the day I got him, you walked like, I don't know, 50 yards away from me. You're like, no.
Kept a wide berth around
going
around that
all
action.
the way around campus. You're like, can you walkie me when you're at the front door so I know to go to the back?
Yeah, I started parking on the side next to Coach, so then I don't even have to walk by your room where there's a giant man-eating spider.
Yeah, you don't even drive to campus anymore because you don't want the spider to get into your car somehow and end up going home with you. So you end up carpooling.
Well, and when this incident happened, I think he fell no more than 3 feet. And one thing that I was really surprised by is just how fragile spiders are. I had no idea, but they really have the same consistency as a water balloon. Like, they have absolutely zero exoskeleton structure to them, especially that weird bulbous part on their butt. Like,
yeah, the part that broke. Yeah.
Well, and from what I understand, like a spider can fall within 3 inches, and they can die from that.
Yeah. They can't fall really high. That's why they need really small cages. Usually, they need like a small tank. One, they have really bad vision, and they get really stressed out easily. So if they can't find their food, and they're in a big enclosure, or if they fall, it can get really stressed out and it can die. Yeah, there's a lot to learn. There's definitely a lot to learn. And I do have a student who is going to maybe have some feelings, some hard feelings, because he had a very deep connection with this spider. But I do believe that the other child will be able to handle it really well, and you'll obviously handle it really well. But I'm pretty nervous about him finding out. I think that I'm going to have a conversation.
Hopefully this weekend I can head that off at the pass, because I'm going to a reptile store and I'm going to try to find a replacement that looks exactly like.
And then, Ed, what are we going to do? We're going to do research and we're going to write a paper and put it in a frame about how to care for and handle this critter, right?
It's more or less going to be in this container until you show up next week and put it in its cage.
He's going to sit in my car. If he's alive or dead, that's not what.
Gonna sit in my
that's
car.
not my responsibility.
It's
at that point. I bought
117 degrees outside.
It's short. R.I.P. Webs.
Yeah, Rip Webs. We love you.
Yep.
May the force be with you. And may you rest in peace.
Pour one out for you, buddy.
Yeah, because I remember I was texting you guys. I'm like, oh, crap.
It's like, deal, and guys. ... The spider fell.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
So depending on your relationship to spiders, this could be a trash can fire, or it could be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I was telling my mom, she's like, and you felt sad about a spider? I was like, Well, yeah, I mean, you spend enough time with like anything and you start to learn its like mannerisms. Like he had a little bit of a personality. He would come out and he would kind of do his little rounds and then he would go back in his little hole. And, when he was hungry, you could kind of tell because he was get a little bit more active and he would be out a little more. And then when he ate, he would be gone. And you knew that. And you connect with that. And you see that every day. And you feed him and you name him. And when you feed a cat or a puppy, you take him home and you have him forever.
Yeah.
That's what they do. And so I was like, yeah, Mom, get over it. I have a heart. I'm sorry.
My mom and I were like on the same page. Like a dead spider is a good spider. Like, and not that I wanted this one to die. Like that was because obviously tarantulas are very, very docile. I could not find anybody in any form anywhere that had ever been bitten by a tarantula.
No, and it's kind of like a little pinch. It's not really like a harsh, ow.
Yeah. Most people, they claim that they've gotten, like, they'll get the hairs.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if the spider's feeling threatened, they'll shoot those little hairs out, and those are like an irritant. But that's like the worst of the worst that I've come across anybody dealing with a tarantula.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's our trash can fire. Note to self, note to you guys that tarantulas cannot fall any more than 3 inches.
Yes.
Let alone 3 feet.
If you're afraid of anything, hold it while it's on the ground already.
Yeah.
Like just be around it on the ground. I think that's
just
it.
don't hold it, period.
Yeah. Or I don't know. It's fine. And we're going to get another spider. And his name's not going to be Webbs number 2 because I refuse. We got to keep Webbs and move on.
It'll be Webbs with 1 B.
Yes,
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
R.I.P. Webbs. What's the episode about?
Buddy. May the force be with you.
So, yeah. On that note, let's dive into our episode.
Let's do it. Terra Nova Part 2.
Yes. So, if you are just turning into this episode, you might want to go back and listen to episode 31. We are going over the Terra Nova incident, which is weird because the Terra Nova incident is named after the ship that had very little to do with the actual expedition itself. It's just, that was the name of the ship. That's the name of the expedition. That's what we're going to go with. In part 1, we kind of dove into the exotic, if that's even a thing you could coin to Antarctica. But we were looking at in the late 1800s, early 1910s, going into the 1920s, how fascinated the world was with the continent of Antarctica. And there was a lot of expeditions. There was all sorts of people that were trying to go there. And they were trying to set a world record of some sort, like be the first to hit the geographic South Pole. You have another guy that wanted to traverse, from coast to coast, all of Antarctica. You have people that were trying to catalog all this stuff. Like Antarctica was literally the final frontier, because obviously in the early 1910s, we weren't going into space yet. But if you ever look up Antarctica, like especially during the winter, where it can get like below 100 degrees Fahrenheit and temperature and all that kind of stuff, you look at Antarctica during the winter, and it's actually not a whole lot different than the planet Mars in terms of temperature and whatnot. What was interesting is that in the early 1910s, humanity actually had a better understanding of the planet Mars than they did of Antarctica, because you could shine a big giant telescope at Mars and you can derive a lot of information from the comfort of an observatory, whereas Antarctica, you hop off your boat, that whole continent is just trying to kill you. It's a very hostile place. And we kind of went over this major expedition and some of the key players. And I think the first guy that really set everything off was Shackleton. And Shackleton, he was famous because he was with Robert Falcon Scott during the original expedition where they were trying to get to the geographic South Pole. And they made it like some 82 degrees south or something like that before they had to turn back. And Shackleton, he kind of set the bar for, okay, if you're going to be successful down here, you've got to pass me. You've got to go past where I went. And I think he went back again and hit like 88 degrees south. And that kind of started this ice race, I guess. I don't know any better term for it. But in the 1910s, we are left with two guys, Robert Falcon Scott and Roald Amundsen. And these two guys couldn't be any more polar opposite of each other in terms of their personalities, their goals, their strategies. A perfect case in point, Roald Amundsen, he was a Norwegian explorer. I don't think this guy had any muscles in his face that could allow him to smile. He is the most dour, stern, emotionless guy that if you ever see a picture of him, I know Kara will have pictures of everybody up on the website, but this guy was just all business. And Amundsen spent most of his time in the Northern Hemisphere. He spent a lot of his time with the Eskimos and the Inuits. He was trained on dog sledding. His whole crew were trained on dog sleds. He preferred to wear furs. He wore. He could survive off the land. He spent a lot of time with the natives in the north learning how to live in Arctic conditions. And that was kind of his approach to it. It's like, okay, if it worked for these people, it should work for me. And Amundsen was really, really big on trying to find the North Pole. And he set up this massive expedition to go to the North Pole until he found out that two Americans claimed that they had found the North Pole. And what were their names? It was Frederick Cook and Robert Peary. And so like Amundsen in 1910, he was going to go to the North, find the North Pole, become famous, and leave Robert Falcon Scott, this British explorer, leave him with Antarctica to the south. So Amundsen and Scott actually had a lot of respect for each other, even though they had completely different philosophies on how to explore and do this thing. But they never really butted heads because Amundsen focused on the north and Scott focused on the south. Well, once Amundsen discovered that these two Americans claimed that they had found the North Pole, at the very last minute, Amundsen was like, you know what? We're going to head south. On June 3rd, 1910, told his crew, no, we're not doing the North Pole thing. We're going to find the South Pole. And then he sent a telegram to Robert Falcon Scott while he was in Portugal and basically sent this telegram that Scott didn't get until way later. It wasn't until he was in Australia or something like that. Scott gets this message from Amundsen saying, beg to inform you, Fram, that was the name of Amundsen's ship, Fram proceeding to Antarctic, Amundsen. At the very last minute, Falcon Scott got word that this guy who wasn't his competition is now a major source of competition, and this guy had a week's head start. Scott kind of crap, he had to piece together his crew. Scott's philosophy was latest and greatest in technology, right? Yeah, sure, they had some sled dogs, but he wanted to use motorized sledges. He found these special Siberian ponies that could, in theory, carry more or pull more. Scott was real big in terms of wearing the latest and greatest of clothing. So instead of wearing furs, he wore a very specific wools and all that kind of stuff. Scott was younger. He was all hip and trendy. He was very charismatic. He was all about his technology, and he was also about his science. And I think this is probably the biggest takeaway from this whole incident is the amount of science that Scott brought to the table. And it's very, very important to recognize that, because there's one guy on the expedition, was it Cherry Gerard? He's like, if I wanted leadership, I go to Shackleton. If I wanted science, I will go to Scott. If I want efficiency, I will go to Amundsen. To kind of, it's a great way to summarize all three guys. On January 14th, 1911, the Fram landed in Antarctica, and Amundsen set up shop. And all Amundsen brought were dogs. I think he had like 4 guys with him, if I remember correctly, 4 or 5 guys, and they were all trained at dog sledding. And between the last episode and this episode, I watched like a 4-hour long documentary about dog sledding. I didn't know this, but not everybody can be a dog sledder. Like, you have to bond with these dogs, and the dogs have to bond with you. And if there is no connection there, if there is no bond, you might as well walk. But the dogs will not do what you want them to do. They will do the opposite. They'll make your life a living nightmare. And Amundsen was real big on that. He was real big on the dogs, and every person on his crew had to be familiar with running dog sleds. The same thing kind of applied to Scott, but not as much. I think Amundsen brought like almost 100 dogs or something crazy like that, whereas Scott brought like a third of that. And he only had 1 guy on his crew that were trained on dog sleds. And Scott was real big about hand pulling these sleds. There was a part of the expedition, which we'll get to here in a minute, where the whole crew had to hand pull their sleds. And you're thinking like, oh my God, why would you want to do that? Well, it turns out in 1993, both the Americans and the Soviets, or I guess they're Russians, I can't remember, the Soviet Union fell, but the Russians and the Americans, they did a study where they tested hand pulling sleds across Antarctica versus using dogs and even motorized sleds. It turns out that hands down, no pun intended, hand pulling a sled is way more efficient and more effective than using dogs or motors, which that kind of blew my mind. And the reason being is that if you're going to bring dogs, you have to bring a lot of food. You have to bring a lot of food that the human can't eat.
I was going to say, is it because you have to provide for something that's living, and like, I mean, the dog has to eat and have fuel.
Yeah, they have to eat a lot
to have the energy to be able to do the labor.
Yeah. So like in a way, what's interesting is like dog sleds are really, really good for like a short haul. So let's say you needed to blitz like 50 miles in a day, but that's all you need to do. Dog sleds all the way. But if you are planning, say, like a 2-month long expedition where you're going from one end of Antarctica to the other end of Antarctica, just pull your own stuff. And the same thing could be said about motorized sleds, because they're even worse in a way, because you have to pack all this diesel fuel, and you have to treat the diesel fuel, because under cold weather it will gellify or gel, and then it's even useless. So, and you can't even burn diesel. It's not like you can take diesel and use it to start fires or treat it like heating oil. Like, diesel doesn't burn unless it's in very, very, very specific conditions. So if I needed to go, say, like 100 miles in a day and that's it, yeah, motorized sleds are the way to go. But if I'm going across country on an expedition, diesel fuel is just dead weight. You can't do anything with it. I thought that was kind of interesting. I thought that was really counterintuitive until I kind of did a little bit more research into it. I'm like, oh, wow, this Scott guy was kind of onto something. So yeah, basically where we left off was this race to get to the South Pole. And what's interesting to note is that Scott got to Antarctica before Amundsen did. And Scott, the first thing he did is he set up depots. Now, both Amundsen and Scott, this is where their strategies were similar, is that they set up all these depots. And the idea behind a depot is that you would send out some guys to, you'd send out like 4 guys, and their sleds are just packed with food. Way more food than what these 4 guys need. The idea is that they would go out, and once they hit, like, say, 78 degrees south or 80 degrees south or 82 degrees south or whatever, they would stop and they would set up these depots. And probably the most famous one for Scott was called the 1-ton depot. And that was like the last, if you were heading back from the South Pole, so if you were heading north, that 1-ton depot was like the last stop before you got back to base camp. And obviously it had a ton of food there. It had heating oil. It had everything necessary. And that 1-ton depot, it was very, very crucial but they set up other ones along the way as well. And Amundsen did the same thing. So the idea is that you would get to the South Pole, and then you need to head back to base camp. Obviously, you can't bring enough food with you from base camp down to the South Pole and then back up north, because you're gone for like a month at a time. And there's no way you can pack enough food to carry with you for all that time. So these depots would be stationed so that when they were coming back up north, they would have regular intervals where they could restock on food and heating oil and all that kind of stuff. The big that was like Scott's big thing was set up those depots, but he also set up, and he spent a lot of time. I guess if you are in a race to get to the South Pole, you could say that Scott wasted a lot of time. But he brought zoologists and bacteriologists, and he brought botanists, he brought geologists, he brought all these scientists along, and he set up all these scientific stations all over the place. So he figured that, okay, if I'm going to go take some dudes with me, I'm going to go hit the South Pole, be the first one to get there, be all famous for that. But I'm also going to have a giant crew of people that are going to be collecting samples, rock samples, ice core samples. They're going to do like some crazy sciencey stuff while I'm in the process of becoming famous for discovering the South Pole. He spent a lot of time. He spent weeks getting all that set up. Whereas like Amundsen, he shows up and he's like, I could care less about the science. I really don't care about any of that stuff. I'm just here for the South Pole and I'm out. And that was Amundsen's strategy. The other part of the strategy too to keep in mind, and we will talk about this, especially on the way back up, they would, both sides, both Amundsen and Scott, they would bring dogs. Yes, the dogs would pull the sleds, but then they also used the dogs as food. As they were heading out and a dog would get sick or die or whatever, they would just eat the dog, right? Free food. And I think Amundsen, with all the dogs that he brought, I can't remember the exact figure, but I think only like 10 or 17 dogs survived. Him and his crew ate the rest of them. So if you're a dog lover, that's kind of brutal. But then again, though, when you really think about the hostile conditions, like that's kind of what you have to do.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to choose to not eat my dog, I would choose to not eat my dog. But I get it. Maybe if I'm really hungry, then ask me. But I don't.
Yeah.
Makes me very, 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 very sad. I could not imagine.
Same. I couldn't. I say now that I couldn't, but if I'm hungry enough, I will.
I know, that's why I'm like, well, ask me like when I first wake up and I haven't eaten all night and I'm like starving and cranky.
I'm a huge dog lover. Like I can't imagine, but I can't.
Clip of the cat, you're looking pretty yummy.
Eat your skinwalker of a dog.
Yeah, he probably tastes like Voldemort or something. I don't know, like a Voldemort soup
from Minecraft. Like if you ever eat like the like you kill those zombies and then they have like that left over and you eat that and it turns you into a zombie for a period of time. Now I've actually had dog before and it's not too bad. No, I had dog testicles before.
I'm gonna bulldozer right over that information.
I was at an Asian restaurant where my mom had a friend from that part of the world, and he took us to this restaurant. I had no idea what I was ordering. I thought it was like a meatball soup. It was actually really, really tasty. Turns out the meatballs were actually dog testicles. And they kind of burst in your mouth like cherry tomatoes.
I don't need to know that.
Let's get back to the story.
Yep. So they had to eat dogs.
Yes. So that was part of the
as well.
Maybe the testicles as well. But that was kind of the strategy that both sides took, and I think it was just universally accepted that if you are going down to the South Pole, this is kind of the process you got to go through. And Scott actually took it one step further because he had those Siberian ponies, and it was the same thing with them. If they died for whatever reason, you ate the ponies. And for me, like in my mind, it's kind of weird because I don't think that type of animal like a horse. I don't think they're very fattening. I think they're probably very lean. And I'm thinking if you are in Antarctica, you need fat. Like you need to load up on as much fat as possible because like who cares about the protein? You need the fat to for energy. So yeah, that just a little caveat, preemptor, dogs do get eaten here. And so like we're going to leave Amundsen alone because the Amundsen side of things is really boring. He didn't keep detailed journals. He could have his entire expedition down to the South Pole literally could have been recorded on a napkin. That's about how exciting it was. Meanwhile, Falcon Scott here, he's a very gifted writer, prolific journalist or journaler. He kept very detailed records of everything. In fact, the only reason why we know what happened, ultimately, even with Amundsen as well as Scott, is because of these journals. And so basically, here's Scott's side of things, right? He left, I think he left on, where was it? It was September 13th, 1911. The plan was going to be that he and 16 men would leave base camp. And he brought everything with him. All the dog sleds were coming along. The 2 remaining motorized sleds came along. He brought the ponies. Not all 16 men were going to make it to the South Pole. The idea is that based on certain degrees latitude, I think it's latitude, he was going to have 4 men be like, okay, you 4 guys, build a depot here, leave as much food as you can, go back to base camp. And then they would go from like, say, 78 degrees south, they would go to like 80 degrees south. And then he would tell the next 3 or 4 men, okay, leave as much food here as possible, head back to base camp. And then they would go to like 82 degrees and then tell the next group of guys like, okay, leave as much stuff here as you can and then go back to base camp. And the idea was to set up these depots and all the way up to what is known as the Beardmore Glacier. So if you were to like look at Antarctica, think of it as kind of like a bullseye, right? You've got this giant circular landmass with all the ice on it at sea level. And then about 3/4 of the way up or down or towards the to the South Pole, you have what's known as the Beardmore Glacier. And this is like a hand-over-hand climb. And once you get over this glacier, it's smooth sailing. It's just flat snow all the way from there, like a couple hundred miles to the geographic South Pole. So that was kind of like the 3/4 way. Like once you get to that point, then Scott would switch over to just man-hauling everything. And by the time he got there from like all these depots at 78 degrees, 80 degrees, 82 degrees, he had these depots set up and it was him and 4 other men that were left. And so I think that's where I left off briefly, went over these guys. I kind of want to revisit them real quick before I get into the remainder of the events. But one of the guys was Edward Wilson. He was an artist, a doctor, a naturalist, an explorer. Edward Wilson was in charge of the science on this leg of the expedition. So yes, you had all the scientists at the base camp that were doing all their stuff, but Scott wanted to have like a resident scientist with him because where else, when other times are you going to collect weird and exotic rocks from the South Geographic Pole, unless you bring a scientist with you? The other guy that they brought along was Lawrence Oates, and he was a good friend of Scott. He was a British Army officer, just a good guy to have around. Henry Robertson Bowers, very good friends with Wilson. This guy was 5'4" and he was built like a mule, and he was in charge of all the depot placements. So when the whole group of 16 men left, it was Bowers that would tell like, okay, you 4 guys, we're setting up a depot here. So drop all your food and head back to base camp. And he was the one who was responsible for the placement of all these depots. The downside to Bowers is that, like I said, he was built like a mule, very reliable, very strong. The only problem is that because of weather, the depots never got positioned where they were optimal. So like they needed a depot like at 80 degrees south, but they couldn't make it that far. So they had to do it 78 degrees. So like all the depots were off by like 2 degrees, which you're thinking that's not that big of a deal. But when you're at that part of the world, 2 degrees is like 50 to 70 miles. So that does kind of play a part. Like that's kind of a big deal. 70 miles in Antarctica is that's a rough time. The other guy, the fourth guy, other than Scott, was Edgar Evans. Now, he was a Welsh Royal Navy petty officer. Do not confuse this. There was another Evans who was at the base camp, and he was kind of like the guy, a much higher ranking officer. He was up there with Scott, and he was kind of like the guy who was in charge when Scott was absent. So Evans, not Edgar Evans, this other Evans, he kind of comes up briefly, but he was the one that was kind of manning everything at base camp. That I bring that up because it kind of get a little confusing because like, wait, I thought this Evans died. No, the other Evans is alive. The other Evans is dead. But then Evans is alive, but this one is dead. This one stayed, but it can get a little confusing. When I was researching this, I had to like stop and go back and make sure I had all my Evans correctly. So yeah, Edgar Evans, I'm just going to refer to him as Edgar and not as Evans, so not to confuse him with the other guy. So they get up to the Beardmore Glacier, and this is where they kind of switch over to hand pulling everything. It was Scott, these 4 other guys, so there's a total of 5 dudes, and from here on out, now this is weird, like to get up on this glacier, I'll have pictures of this on the website, but like these sleds are probably like 8 to 10 feet long, and they had to like carry these things up the side of the glacier. Like there's no cool way of getting them up or down, so it was a lot of like hand over hand pulling and climbing and all that stuff. Once you get up on the glacier, it's not bad, but it's a holy nightmare trying to get it up there. And I bring that up because that's going to play a part here on the way back. For the most part, their plan worked. The 5 men made it over the Beardmore Glacier, and they were fully prepared to then hand pull the sleds for the rest of the way, knowing that they will have food reserves for the return trip deposited by those folks who turned back and left their rations. There was also that 1-ton depot. While Scott and crew were on the Beardmore Glacier heading toward the South Pole, there were plans to stock up that 1-ton depot with even more stuff. And there was also a plan to have sled dogs waiting there for when Scott came back. Therefore, once they hit that 1-ton depot, they hitch up to the dogs, and then it's just, smooth sailing all the way back to base camp. So, as you can see, a lot of moving parts. There was a lot of pieces. There was a lot of timing that had to be just right. And for those of you who follow the podcast for a while now, you notice that the more complicated the plan gets, the more opportunity for things to go sideways, as you will see here in a hot minute. So yes, they relied on these depots on the way back, knowing that, hey, these will be here for us. It'll be fine. What could possibly go wrong? By January 9th, Scott and crew passed the Shackleton prior record of 88 degrees at 23 seconds south. Already, even if they turn back now, they've beaten the world record of getting as far south as possible. So 88 degrees, 23 seconds, 7 days later, Scott, while hand pulling, so it took 7 days to go that remaining 1 degree and 37 seconds south. It took 7 days just to travel that last bit to the South Pole. But yeah, essentially Scott made it to the South Pole, and time for celebration. The only issue was that as they saw the South Pole off in the distance, they saw a black makeshift tent standing there. And when they pulled out their little telescopes to see, like, that shouldn't be there. Like, we're the first to be here. There should be no little tent out there, like, up by the South Pole. Like, this is impossible. When they looked through their telescopes, they saw a cute little Norwegian flag flapping in the breeze majestically at the South Pole. In other words, Scott had been beaten by Amundsen. So imagine planning this giant expedition and meticulously, like, so far, everything is going swimmingly. Like, everything is going perfectly. And imagine, like here you are expecting this huge amount of success, and you find out that somebody else beat you to it, and you didn't even know.
Yeah, that's a bummer.
Yeah, talk about being defeated. I got to give Scott credit though. Like, yes, he was defeated by Amundsen, but I totally respect Scott's attitude during this. He wrote in his journal that he said, the pole, yes, but under very different circumstances for those expected. Great God, this place is, this is an awful place and terrible enough for us to have labored to it without the reward of priority, meaning, like, this place sucks and we busted our butts to get here, only to find out that somebody else beat us to it. But then I like this last part here. He's like, well, it's something to have gotten here anyways. Like, yeah, we weren't the first ones here, but we're the second ones. And that speak volumes.
That's a Kara attitude right there.
Yes.
If I've ever heard one. She's like, you know what? I did all of this and I put all my work into it. At least I got here. You know, at least I got here.
You
That's
did it.
Something.
Yeah, you did it.
Take like I would sit there and be like, oh, you. I would have like, you know, like a little munchkin face, like, I'm gonna bite your head off type of thing. Like, I would be so grumpy and angry, and Kara'd be like, you know, at least I'm here. Yeah,
we
I got here. That's something. That's crazy. Yeah. What a wild trip it was.
Like, so far, 99.9999999% of the human race hasn't made it here.
At least I have a better story to tell too.
Yeah.
At least it wasn't boring.
Right? Yeah, like, you couldn't just, like, Kara wouldn't be like, well, at least I didn't fill out my whole entire journal on a napkin. I've got, like, multiple journals of cool stuff that happened.
That's the historian in her. She's like, you know what? I documented what I needed to.
I cited my sources.
There. I stayed alive.
Yep.
You know,
pictures.
It is.
I mapped it.
Well, actually, he did. Scott did bring photographers along. Like, there's some absolutely stunning pictures of when that 16 men crew left. He brought a photographer along, and they were like the first ones to like photograph these parts of Antarctica. Like, they don't exist anywhere else in the world. And I think Scott too, because Scott was kind of like a jack of all trades, master of none. I think he's like, okay, Amundsen beat me to it, but at least when I come back, I'm going to have all the science stuff. I'm going to have like popular opinion. It's going to be pretty cool. Like, I've got more than just me getting to the South Pole as an accolade. I have a lot of respect for Scott in this regard. So, but Scott didn't quite give up so quickly. Scott was like, okay, let's go there. Let's finish the distance. Let's get there. Let's take some pictures of us or whatever at the South Pole. But I wonder if we can beat Amundsen back to Australia and get the message out first that we had hit the South Pole. So it's kind of like Columbus versus Amerigo Vespucci. Yes, Columbus was technically the first one. I know there's Vikings, Kara, but like Columbus was the first, you know, Portuguese, Spanish guy that made it to the Americas, but it was Amerigo Vespucci who made his way back to the German map makers, and he got there before Columbus did, which is the reason why this is called America and not Columbia. So I think that was kind of like Scott's plan. It's like, okay, Munson beat me to it, but I can beat him to Australia. So
kind of sounds like something's going to go even worse. It feels like he had too good of an attitude. Am I on the right? Am I feeling the right vibe here?
Yeah, I feel like Scott kind of had this air about him of like invincibility, where if your attitude is positive enough, there's not going to be a whole lot that can defeat you. And I would say for the most part that is true. I think so much success isn't tied to someone's innate abilities or skills or even luck. I think somebody's success is really dependent on their attitude and how they treat others and their outlook. I've noticed that the more positive an outlook is, the more successful somebody can be, as opposed to being like a curmudgeon and a Debbie Downer. And yeah, I've seen it play out both ways. So on January 18th, so don't forget, these guys are hand pulling their sleds. So what was it? It was January 9th. That's when they passed the 88 degree mark. And then 9 days later, they finally get to the they finally get to where they were to the South Pole, and they get to what is known as Amundson's tent. So it took him 9 days to go from 88 degrees south to 90 degrees south, which that's just mind blowing. How like that 2 degrees is a real butt kicker when you're down in the Antarctica. They get to what is now known, it's a very famous tent. I think it's still there. It's called Amundson's tent. And inside, they found a large stockpile of food, which Amundsen purposely left the food there. Amundsen, he's like, hey, we had extras. I know Scott is coming. He's going to get here eventually. So he intentionally filled this tent up full of food just for Scott and his crew to be able to get back. Like, see what I mean when I mentioned it in the last episode? Like, yes, there was a competition, but this isn't like people being douchebags to each other. This is one of these things where like everybody was kind of like respectful of each other, and everybody did try to help each other out in their own way, which isn't something that we're used to seeing when we're talking about dumpster fires. When we're talking about dumpster fires, we're so used to people like cutting corners or being backstabby or whatever. That's not the case here. Like these guys, yes, they were competing, but they were also gentlemen at the same time. So this is like unlike any other dumpster fire we've covered in the past. Yes, inside this tent was a bunch of food left for Scott and his crew, and there was also a letter, and it was addressed to Scott. In this letter was like a favor that Amundsen asked of Scott, and basically it was like, hey, look, if I don't make it back for whatever reason, can you deliver this letter to King Håkon, I can't pronounce his name, but to the King of Norway, right? Håkon the 7th. Can you do me a favor, deliver this letter to the King of Norway saying that I got here first? And that would be great. And we got here on December 14th. Think about this. Amundsen had beaten Scott to the South Pole by 34 days. That's another gut punch right there. And if you think about it, like, yes, Scott beat Amundsen to Antarctica, but in all reality, Scott also spent weeks and weeks and weeks setting up the science depots and all that kind of stuff. In theory, if Scott had landed in Antarctica and just freaking hopped on the dogs and just made a beeline for it, he probably would have gotten there at the same time, if not beaten Amundsen to the South Pole. But Scott had other things to take care of. I do find that interesting that Amundsen's like, hey, bro, I know we're competing. I know I stole this from underneath you. It was kind of a jerk move on my part, but you know me. I'm here to find poles. You're here for a much bigger purpose. Don't let me distract that from you. But if you could do me a favor, in case if I don't make it and turn into a human popsicle, can you deliver this letter to the King of Norway saying that I got here on December 14th, 1911? And Scott was like, well, that's more salt to the wound. But he's like, okay. And that's what he did. He loaded up on the food from the tent, and he took the letter with him. Being British, this is what British do all through the 1500s, all the way up to the present day. They planted a British flag on the South Pole. So to this day, there is a Norwegian flag, and then there's a bigger British flag because the British of it all. Like, fine, the Norwegians beat me here, but Scott's like, I left a bigger flag. And it wouldn't even surprise me when like Neil Armstrong landed on the moon if there wasn't like a British flag already on the moon from like the 1700s. I feel like that's what the British would have done. They would have somehow got a flag on the moon, and it would have been like a few inches bigger than the American flag, because that's what the British do, is they go over the world at this time and they planted flags. And I think I left a comment here, like there's probably a bunch of British flags on the moon at this point. So the hard part's over. So let's go back. They pack up, they start heading up north, and for 3 weeks, the men made really, really good progress. Bear in mind, again, they're hand pulling everything, and they started heading back up north, and it's like a straight line. Like, these guys didn't dilly-dally, like, they didn't, like, zigzag anywhere. No, they just went straight back. And for 3 solid weeks, they made really, really good progress, but this is where the problems start to develop. Edgar Evans, he was starting to deal with frostbite. I think he had it in his hands. And so for those of you who may not know, frostbite is where literally your extremities, usually it starts with your fingers and your toes, basically the blood freezes. And you can tell the first telltale sign of frostbite is your fingers, like your fingertips, turn black and it's dead. And as your body continues to freeze more and more and more, the body part will then turn black. And it's not uncommon for that body part to fall off. There have been cases where people get frostbite in their feet and like literally their foot just snaps off. And what really sucks about frostbite, your first instinct is like, oh crap, I better warm my hands up. Well, there's been a lot of cases where people get frostbite in their hands and they finally get a fire lit and then they start warming up their hands. What happens is that your hand is technically dead. And then as the thawed out blood makes its way to the nerves or what's remaining of the nerves in the hand, it is excruciating pain. Because if you think about it, your hand is essentially now, instead of being frozen, it is now rotting off. So frostbite is gnarly stuff. Today they have means if it's even a relatively severe case of frostbite, they can replenish the tissue and stuff like that. But back then, if your hand had frostbite, they just amputated it. There's nothing they could really do. You couldn't reheat it. You couldn't revive anything, especially in the feet. Scott recorded that Evans was a good deal run down, which I think is an understatement. Oates' feet began developing frostbite. So that's a problem because I'm not a podiatrist, but in order to walk, humans need feet.
Yeah, it's a little hard to walk miles and miles without a foot.
Yeah,
2
like
feet.
walking on stumps.
Oh, that sounds terrible.
Yeah. It's just Google images of frostbite, and it's pretty horrendous. And I'll have a picture of the crew of Scott and everybody. When you look at them, like their faces are, it's a black and white image, but their faces look black, and that's because of snow blindness. They didn't have sunblock back then. And I think Evans was really, really suffering from snow blindness. But basically, it's like a sunburn, but from the ground up. Because, snow is highly reflective. And it just, imagine being in like 100-degree below zero weather and your face feels like it's burning as though you are getting a really, really bad sunburn. Count me out. I'm not a very good explorer in this regard, especially if you could just fly over the South Pole. So yeah, Oates' feet started developing frostbite, and they were only getting worse day by day. And then the provisions were starting to run low. Remember, the depots that they set up were further back 2 degrees. They had to travel an extra like 75 miles to get to the depot than where they were originally intending. If the weather had permitted when they were initially setting things up, it would have worked a lot better. They would have gotten to the depots when they mathematically calculated when they would need to be there at the most. Instead, they were running out of food and then like, oh yeah, we still got like 3 days to go before we hit the next depot. So now we jump to February 7th. They reached the Beardmore Glacier and they started to descend. This would be like the halfway mark, I guess you could say. Remember that glacier is a vertical drop. So they had to like try to carry these hand sleds down. And that's not going to go well. So while descending, they were having a difficult time finding one of the depots left behind for their return. So that was the other issue, is one of the major depots that was near the Beardmore Glacier. They couldn't find it. So they're like, okay, let's stop. Let's take a breather. Like, yes, we're running out of food. We can't find this, but let's take like a half a day's rest and we'll start again like the next day. So since they're on a rocky patch of ground, Scott ordered Wilson to do some, I love this word, geologizing. That's like when I'm like up there with spaghettification in astronomy. I like geologizing, which basically he sent Wilson out to go collect about 30 pounds of rocks. So instead of like conserving energy and conserving food, they added more weight to the sleds in the form of rocks. Don't forget about those rocks, because those rocks, they do a lot, if not getting them killed, but yeah, you'll see what I mean. In the process of trying to descend from the Beardmore Glacier, Evans sustained a hand injury on top of his frostbite and a severe head injury due to a series of falls trying to get their like 200-pound sled down a vertical drop. On February 17th, Evans collapsed and died. So they made it down, but he was just too far gone. His body just couldn't do it anymore. And yeah, he died. So first casualty. The remaining men reached the depot at 82 degrees south. So I think the original intention was to hit it at 84 degrees, but remember, they didn't make it far enough when they were heading out. So they hit it at 82 degrees south. And the original plan was to meet up with some dogs there. So there were supposed to actually be, I thought it was 1 ton depot. I got it mixed up. They were supposed to meet the dogs at the 82 degrees south depot. And that would have made it so they could get back to base camp into the other 2 depots a lot quicker. The problem was that they were 3 days early. They weren't really aware of, again, the timing here had to be impeccable. There was a crew of people that had to go all the way out to 82 degrees south to drop off these dogs. And there was a whole side story behind that was a fiasco. On February 27th, 1912, Scott wrote in his journal, keep in mind, like they set out in the beginning of January. So they've been out for like a month and a half now. Scott wrote in his journal that he thinks they overshot their mark and decided to keep moving to the next depot. So instead of hanging out there for 3 days because they really weren't sure, they're like, okay, fine, we'll just go to the next one. He noticed too that each stop as they were hitting these depots, there was less and less heating oil left behind. Heating oil works great to keep you from freezing to death at night, and it helps to cook food. So without heating oil, that becomes a problem. Now we get into the real dumpster fire. This is where we approach the dumpster full of highly combustible trash, and you flick a match inside of it and walk away. As they kept trudging along, they were met with a severe drop in temperatures. I didn't know this. I thought for sure, like, okay, wait, if the temperatures drop, wouldn't that make the snow icier and make it easier to like travel through? But I guess what happens when the temperatures get too low, the ice turns into what is known as woolly crystals. And Scott likened it to pulling these sleds over like a sand dune. Like it's really weird. Like the ice crystals, I guess whenever you're pulling a sled over it, it's like with ice skating, the blades of the ice skate actually melt the ice a little bit. And that water ice skate layer is what reduces the friction and makes it so that you can, travel on the ice easier. Same thing with skis and snowboards. But I guess if the snow is too cold, it turns to woolly crystals and it does nothing but bog down the sleds because it doesn't behave like ice. It behaves like sand, which that sucks. The wind died down, which Scott thought would help on their journey, but it also became more of a hindrance. So when the wind died down, it kind of like the snow and the moisture in the air just hung there. So when the wind dies down, it doesn't push that out of the way. So it's like fog. So now you can't see too far ahead of you. On March 10th, now we are in, what are we, 2 months after? On March 10th, oh, that's my wedding anniversary. Huh, interesting. So they were hanging out at this depot waiting for the dogs to show up. It became evident that the dogs were not coming. On March 16th, Oates, whose hands and feet were now completely useless, so this guy was just a walking stump. He was like that knight from Monty Python, where he had no carpals, metacarpals, tarsals, and metatarsals to utilize for anything. This is kind of sad. Oates, who is now completely useless due to frostbite, told the men as they were like hunkered down in this little, Scott wrote in his journal that Oates said that I'm just going to go outside and maybe sometime. And he was never seen again. In fact, they actually never found his body. They have no idea where he ended up. But Oates' philosophy is just like, if I can't pull anything, if I can't do anything, there's absolutely no point in me sticking around, eating food, and chewing up resources. He told his friends, I'm going to go out for a walk. I may be sometime, and never seen again. So we've got 2 people that have died during all this. At this point, Scott became convinced that their luck had run out. And he had some time, and he wrote a farewell letter to Sir Edgar Speyer. This is an interesting guy, American-born turned British subject and a philanthropist. He worked a lot on the British Underground Railways. A lot of his railways, like the Tube and all that stuff, would later be used in World War II for like to account for like bunkers during the bombings of London and whatnot. He wrote this farewell letter to Speyer, and he says, "We very nearly came through, and it's a pity to have missed it, but lately I have felt that we have overshot our mark. Again, this is the total Kara response here. No one is to blame, and I hope no attempt will be made to suggest that we had lacked support." In other words, the dogs never made it. Somebody had a job to do. They failed to do it. We'll cover why that happened, but even onto his dying day, Scott refused to blame anybody. Like, this is nobody's fault. It is what it is. I wish we could have made it back, but hey, I don't want anybody to think like I'm pinning this on anybody. Oates' sacrifice helped to lighten the load and speed things up, but by this time it was too late. Like, everybody knew. Scott knew, like, this isn't going to end well. Scott's right foot was becoming frostbitten. And on March 20th, a massive blizzard stalled their advances as they tried to get to the famous 1-ton depot. This was their only shot at survival. And they weren't that far away. They were maybe only 20 miles or so away from 1-ton depot, but they had no visibility. They couldn't find it, and they didn't have the energy. On March 29th, so 9 days after, we're talking weeks that they only went, like maybe 50 miles. And like, imagine being stuck in the snow for like 9 days with no food or anything. To me, that's kind of like a really crappy way to go. But he wrote in his journal, "Every day we have been ready to start for our depot 11 miles away. But outside the door of the tent, it remains a scene of whirling drift. I do not think we can hope for any better things now. We shall stick it out to the end, but we are getting weaker, of course, and the end cannot be far. It seems a pity, but I do not think I can write more. R. Scott, last entry." So yeah, he wrote that down. This is last entry. And then he wrote down, "For God's sake, look after our people." And it is around March 29th, 1912, that it is presumed that Scott and all of his remaining men, which I think was like one guy left, they died at around this time. That's it. Scott and the whole expedition is dead. Does that satisfy as a dumpster fire?
I don't think I have a lot of words for that. Yeah, you were like, and then Oates goes off and is like, yeah, bye. Like,
yeah, he's like, hey, I'm going to go for a walk, but I may be a while.
I'm not coming back. Don't look for me. Don't try. You're going to die if you do. And then they still die. Kara's like, at least they got there.
They got there.
Well, and the thing that gets me is the resolution that these people have. Like, I if it were me, if I was on that expedition, I would be screaming and crying and being a little snot the whole way. Like, I don't want to die. I don't want to freeze out here. Like, this sucks. I would be the worst companion to bring along on a trip like that. Because I don't know about you guys. I got everything to live for. But these guys, they're like, hey, we knew this could happen. It is what it is. And, hey, this is what happened. And these are the consequences. They did know that dying from hypothermia is actually a relatively peaceful way to go, because there's a point where you don't actually feel cold anymore. You actually start to feel warm and you just get sleepy, and that's it. It's a relatively peaceful way to go. And I think that helps, as opposed to like being burned to death or, being shot or, or whatever. Let's take a look at the other side of this dumpster fire. What happened with the dogs? In part 1, we talked about a guy by the name of Mears. He was the guy that was supposed to get like the Siberian ponies. He was supposed to get all the dogs lined up and all that stuff. So he was like the dog guy, or he was like the animal guy. And he was set out on the first week of February to 80 to 82 degrees south with the dogs and excess rations, XS as in like extra summit ration. If the dogs could not make it, it was important to send out a hand-pulled crew. In other words, Mir's job was to get out there in February to reinforce, like help out the crew that were coming back. That was the original plan, was to constantly be stocking up these depots as much as possible so that, there would be no way that they would run out of food on the way back. So another element of complexity to the plan. And if the dog's going to make it, then Mirrors is supposed to go out there with a hand-pulled crew. Mirrors was instructed to turn back much later, and the trip south meant that he got back to base camp much later than anticipated. And it was believed that he resigned because he was like fed up with this whole trip. In reality, Mirrors was set to head out when he got word that his father had passed away in England and he needed to leave ASAP to take care of the estate. I'm assuming this guy had a rather large estate, and the longer that he's in Antarctica, the more that estate will get all jacked up. So I can kind of see where Mirrors is coming from. Like, hey, I need to get back and I need to take care of this. But in doing so, it left like a vacuum of orders. And for quite some time, nobody thought that, Mirrors, this was his job. He was supposed to reinforce 80 and 82 degrees depots. Maybe we should send somebody else out in his place. People just didn't think of that. That kind of that is what happened to the dogs. That's the reason why the dogs never made it there to begin with. Now, there was another guy. He was a bacteriologist, Edward Atkinson. He was now put in charge of everything in Scott's absence, but the problem was this guy was a scientist, not a leader. On February 13th, Atkinson sent out Dmitry Jarov and some dogs to meet up with Scott on the barrier, but was delayed due to bad weather. That was the same bad weather that really messed up Scott's crew on the way back. They couldn't make it. In the process of being sold by bad weather, another trio of reinforcements were heading back north. This is Lieutenant Evans, not the Evans in the Scott group. He had come down with scurvy, and he had to be hand-pulled by two other men back to the base camp. They were supposed to go out there, meet up with Scott and everybody on the way back, but he got scurvy and headed back. Now, Atkinson was left with a choice. Lieutenant Evans is like, no, Atkinson, keep going, meet up with Scott, get him back here, get him home, like you're the only hope. But Atkinson was like, no, the priority is to get Lieutenant Evans back to base camp. I personally think the reason why Atkinson did this is Lieutenant Evans was an actual military trained leader, whereas Atkinson wasn't. And I think he actively tried to preserve Evans's life so that Atkinson could like pass the mantle of leadership over to Evans and be like, hey, you figured this out. I'm not good at it. That decision is probably what killed the Scott and everybody else. Because if Atkinson would have kept going, he would have met up with them and potentially saved their lives. Instead, Atkinson wanted to hand over authority to Evans. And the only way he could do that is to get Evans back safely and let Evans run the show from here on out. There was a guy, he actually wrote a book about this. His name is Apsley George Benet Cherry Gerard. That guy has a mean signature. Anybody with all those names would have a mean signature. But he wrote about this incident in his 1922 book, The Worst Journey, which I think that just summarizes up everything. He wrote that Dmitry headed out to One Ton Depot on February 26th and arrived on March 10th. And then he was ordered by Atkinson to not risk the dogs and had 24 days of rations. So they could wait there or they could keep going further. If they kept going further, they would run the risk of having to kill the dogs to survive. And if they hit that point, there would be no point because the whole idea was to get the dogs to Scott and his crew to get him back. So they could spend 4 days heading south to find Scott and his men, and then spend 4 days coming back. Any longer, and they would risk running and having to eat the dogs, which would have made the whole thing a moot point. The weather being too bad, same weather that messed up Scott's progress, on March 10th, Cherry, Gerard, and Dmitry turned back. He was only 70 miles away from Scott and his men. And once Gerard learned that he was like a day and a half march away from Scott and his crew, that plagued him for the rest of his life. Because he could have taken those 4 days and kept going south and he would have met up with them. And this would have been like Atkinson, like this would have been another opportunity where they could have saved these guys' lives, but they had to make a choice based on the information that they had, and they turned back. Atkinson sent out one last relief effort on March 26th. But by March 30th, with the weather now below 40 degrees, keep in mind we were now heading into the Antarctic winter, more like their fall. He determined at this point there was no way Scott and his men could still be alive. Okay. Scott's conclusion. On October 29th, a search party was sent out to find the bodies of Scott and his men. On November 12th, they found the tent containing the frozen bodies of Scott, Wilson, and Bowers, just 11 miles away from One Ton Depot. Like, if the weather had just been clear enough, they would have been able to see it. And if that was the case, they probably would have toughed it out and made it there. It's only 11 miles away. I don't care how hungry you are, how frostbitten you are. You could traverse 11 miles if you know that hope is in sight. So, like, there were so many close calls. There were so many cases where, man, they were so close. Due to the cold weather, Scott's journal was perfectly preserved. So there are pictures of, like, the three men. Like, they're kind of like laying in their sleeping bags, completely frozen inside this tent. Because of the cold weather and the dry conditions, the journals were, like, perfectly preserved. And they shed a lot of light on what happened and filled in the missing pieces that the rest of the exploration were missing. Like, they were trying to figure this out. A cairn of snow was built over their bodies with a cross made of skis mounted on top. As far as I understand, that cairn is still there. Like, maybe it's partially covered in snow, but the nice thing about building materials in Antarctica is it's abundant and it never goes anywhere. It's like building a snowman on Mars. It will always be there. Then they tried to find Oates' body, but only found a sleeping bag. They built a cairn in the general area of where they think he died. When word got back to England about what happened, Scott and his men were regarded as heroes, and the entire event was chalked up to just one big tragedy. And it was chalked up to, like, a lot of people, if they had just waited a day, if they just traveled a little further, if they had just made one simple decision a little more carefully, this would not have ended up the way that it did. However, though, later on, researchers started to second guess Scott's decision and his ability to pick men for the job, such as Atkinson. Like, why would you choose a bacteriologist to run this entire expedition? Like, come on. Whereas, like, Amundsen, very careful about who he picked. And they all had to check a very specific set of skills. Like, people started second guessing, like, really, like, Atkinson was your best choice. They also questioned Scott's organizational skills of the entire expedition. Scott was criticized for having too many components and too many ifs in the decisions that were made outside of Scott's presence. So everybody that was trying to rescue them, like Evans and Atkinson and Mears and, like, all these Cherry Gerard and all these people, they had to make decisions on, well, I guess this is what we're supposed to do. And that's just a bad way to go. Like, that's just adding more and more fuel to the dumpster fire in that case. However, it is possible to make the argument that Amundsen is the one responsible for the fates of Scott and his men. It turned out that the two Americans who claimed that they had discovered the North Pole, Frederick Cook and Robert Peary, were highly questionable and not accurate. So if Amundsen had just waited to actually confirm that these two Americans actually did not discover the North Pole, then Amundsen would have stayed up there, he would have found it, and then Scott and his crew wouldn't be so rushed. So much of the bad decision-making in this whole expedition was a result of being rushed to get to the South Pole and be the first ones to do it. Because of their claims, Amundsen immediately headed south. Given that he waited till the last minute to tell anyone, let alone Scott, that he was heading south, this put Scott in a really, really tough spot. So he had to decide, okay, am I going to go down there for the science, or am I going to go down there to be the first to hit the South Pole? And because Scott prioritized the South Pole, he had to rush and make a lot of hasty decisions and put a lot of things in place that probably weren't the best idea. So because of Amundsen, Scott had to rush things, including his decision-making while in Antarctica, albeit Scott did take the time to get the sciencey stuff going, first to his credit. So I respect him for that. If Amundsen had just waited a little longer, he could have taken the North Pole. Scott would have gotten to Antarctica, where he would have had the time to organize everything more carefully. Yeah, the two use similar strategies of the depots and whatnot, but here are the main differences between Scott and Amundson's implementation. Amundson's goal was simply to get to the South Pole. He was not interested in the science. He wasn't interested in log keeping. He didn't care about any of that stuff. His goal was to just get to the South Pole. Amundsen also only worked with guys that were all trained in dog sledding and skiing, as well as snow survival. He was going to go down there with a bunch of Eskimos, like trained people that knew how to live in these conditions. He also only relied on dog sledding instead of using motorized sledges and ponies. He also utilized a very simple plan: gather up as many dogs as possible, get to the South Pole as fast as possible, take a few pictures. There's actually kind of a funny picture of like these four dudes looking at the Norwegian flag outside of Amundsen's tent. They're like, wow, so majestic. It's like four silhouettes of a dude standing in front of this tiny little tent. It's kind of funny when you really think about it. So they get down there as fast as possible, take a few pictures, pitch a tent, and get the hell out of there. And he did. He made it back in like 2 weeks. Like Amundsen did not hang around. He got in there, he got out. Scott's plan was extremely ambitious and overcomplicated with too many moving pieces. Even though Scott and his crew had carefully mapped out everything down to every last detail, the complexity of the expedition would make it nearly impossible to not run into a dumpster fire. So now we can kind of see the difference between Amundsen. Like, how did Amundsen pull this off whereas Scott didn't? But what about those rocks that Wilson geologized, that Beardmore Glacier? So Scott's scientific contributions are huge, and his scientific contributions set the precedent for Antarctic science today. The 12 curated scientists made discoveries in zoology, botany, geology, glaciology, and meteorology. The Terra Nova returned to England with over 2,100 plants, animals, and fossils, 400 of which were new to science. The meteorological data collected was the longest unbroken weather record in the early 20th century, and it set the baseline that climate scientists use today to compare global warming. So the temperatures that they took back then for all the time that they were there, that is what scientists use today to kind of show like, hey, Earth is heating up. And it was based off of the temperatures that Scott and his expedition collected. In 1920, the Terra Nova geographer Frank Debenham and geologist Raymond Priestley found the Scott Polar Research Institute at the University of Cambridge, which contains one of the largest libraries of polar research. It is still there to this day, and it is like the number one go-to spot. If you need to study anything about Antarctica, that's the place to go to. And that has Scott's library, all of his findings, all the research that has came afterwards. Like, not bad, bro. Oh, and those 30 pounds of rocks that Wilson collected. Well, they contained fossilized Glossopteris plants. Sick. They had fossilized plants. Well, here's the kicker. The same exact fossils, those fossilized plants, were found in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, and India. Because of that, it proved the theory of Pangaea, which states that all the continents at one point in time were one giant landmass. So because of Scott told Wilson to go pick up rocks, there was fossils on there that proved that Earth was one giant landmass that broke apart over billions of years. And the only way that was ever discovered, the only way that was proved, it was because of this expedition. That yes, the men died. Yes, it was a dumpster fire, but a lot came out of it, including a revised version of world history. Not bad. So that is the Terra Nova freezing dumpster fire. Albeit, I bet these guys would have killed for like a legit dumpster fire, like a hot steaming pile of trash burning. I'm sure they would have preferred that over the outcome. But yeah, this is the Terra Nova.
Excellent.
Very unlike any other dumpster fire we've covered.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
It really is. That is, it really isn't a situation where someone did something other than, I mean, the Atkins guy is kind of a douche for.
I don't think he was a douche. He was just in way over his head. Like, he was a guy that you give him like a team of like 2 undergrads. Like that's the extent of his leadership capabilities, is to help like 2 undergrads with their PhD thesis. Putting him in charge of an expedition where there was literally hundreds of people in all different branches of science
Just
and military.
was not his place. It was just a weird that's an interesting piece in it for sure.
Yeah. And it's one of those things I can't say I blame the guy. But then again, though, when Lieutenant Evans is like, Atkinson, go. You need to keep going. You will find them. If he had just done that, like, instead of Atkinson be like, nope, I want to pass the torch off to you. I don't want to do this anymore.
See, that's my problem. He's like, no, I'm not going to commit to it. I'm not going to get all the way through it. I'm going to hand it off to that guy. And it's going to be all his doing now. And that's kind of I don't like that.
Yeah.
I don't like pushing responsibility.
Well, yeah. And it's definitely like on the surface is a douchebaggy move. But I also kind of feel like Atkinson is like, hey, look, this is going to fare a lot better if this military leader is in charge.
And that's where that's where I can understand where he's like,
Yeah. As opposed to be, but I don't know, like if you and Carol were stuck out there and somebody said, hey, trust me, keep going, you'll find them. And I still had like maybe 5-6 people with me, plus all the food in the world. Like, I would risk it. I mean, all he had to do is just go out for 2 days, and he would have run into him.
I wouldn't have made that choice for sure.
Yeah, but you know, I think Cherry Gerard said it best. He's like, hey, look, hindsight is 20/20. We made the best decisions with what information we had at the time, and ultimately, it wasn't enough, and this is what happened. So I need to read his book, The Worst Journey. I mean, I've read parts of it and stuff like that, but he has a rather interesting take on it. And then in the 70s, a lot of historians came out and they were like scathing on Scott. Like they just kind of roasted him. But to me, if Scott was this bad, if he was that incompetent, then not only would he have died, the entire expedition would have died. And there would have been no scientific discoveries to be had. Like, if he was truly that incompetent, I feel like nothing would have come about. And so, yeah, I don't know. I don't necessarily agree with the people from the 70s who make this argument. I could see where they're coming from. But at the end of the day, it's just like, dang, it sucks. But at least something good did come out of it.
Someone had to do it. You know what I mean? It's the thing is like, someone has to do it. And it just happened to be him. And all these people amongst him, and I mean, what a guy that Scott is for sure.
I would have loved to have met this guy. He was very jovial. He was very nice. He never played a blame game. He never criticized anybody. He really did, like, if it just wasn't the act of God going against him, I think his personality and his positive attitude would have gotten through it.
You know what I've noticed I don't, well, actually, maybe I don't remember before that, but you did the oil spill, and the captain, I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but he was kind of the same way where he was like, it's my fault. I shouldn't have fallen asleep. Yeah. It's not their fault. It's on me. I'm gonna take the whole blame. Same energy.
Yeah. Like, yeah, he like, hey, I slept. That's on me. I didn't train my officers properly. That's on me. And so, like, yeah, that's literally the epitome of taking ownership of the situation. And that's something that you don't see very often. I get a kick out of, like, because we deal with elementary kids. We're like, hey, whose paper is this? And everybody's like, it's not mine. Well, I didn't ask who it wasn't. I was asking who it was.
Are you quoting me from earlier today?
That and another teacher.
Literally was like, I didn't ask if you didn't do it. I asked if you did do it.
Yep.
So we had seemed like you did.
We had Mr. Joe in there. He was covering a bathroom break, and he was talking to the kids, and he's like, who's like pile of papers is this sitting by the front door? And one kid's like, it's not mine. He's like, funny, I didn't ask you who it wasn't. I was asking who it was.
Yeah, it's
So that
just
must be a
plain simple,
Montessori
like,
question to
it's
ask.
it's just I didn't really think that was what I wanted to know, but thanks.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh,
FYI, it was Captain Pestrangio Ruggiati.
Ruggiati, that's right.
That was the captain of the Torrey Canyon. Yep,
That
so
guy.
I
Pestrangio.
wanted to
Ruggiati.
try something real quick. Let me know if this is stupid, but I figured a good pairing for this episode, literature-wise, go and read 1938, John Campbell, Who Goes There? And then,
Okay.
if you're not a big reader, go and watch 1982's The Thing, John Carpenter.
Yes.
So I just suggest those two things. If you're a reader, go read that novella. If you're a moviegoer, go watch The Thing.
Fun fact about that 1982's The Thing, that was actually a science fiction story written in the 1880s.
This says it's based on a 1938 novella.
Yes,
Well,
and the
good.
1938 novella is based off of a
Got it.
short story that was written in the 1880s.
Got it. Anyway, go watch The Thing.
I'll dig it up. I'll get it to you. It's an interesting read. It's like once you read it, you're like, oh, I could see the inspiration behind this. But
Yeah.
this isn't a science fiction lit podcast. But
No, but go
I'll
watch
have to
The
look
Thing.
that up though.
Watch The Thing. It's a good movie. I
Watch
enjoy
the
it.
thing.
It's John Carpenter.
It's about that thing.
John Carpenter. Halloween. But yeah, after you
It's
listen
good.
to this podcast, go watch that.
So yeah, I think who's coming up next? Kara, are you going next,
I
or
think
Deja? Are you
Deja's
going next?
turn
Or...
is
Me.
next.
Okay, what are you working on?
I am going to be focusing on the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory Fire.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a daisy.
Literally, no pun intended, the polar opposite of my topic.
Just stuff on fire rather than freezing to death. You know, it's very interesting how much outcome we've gotten from it.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot of people know what it is, so hopefully, I don't know, I'm gonna try to make it not so morbid and more about the outcome of it, which would be really nice. But
Yeah.
you know me, I usually end up talking about some morbid stuff. So
It's going to be intense. It's
yeah, it's a hard one. It is a hard one, but it is a very important. Like all these stories, it's always very important to tell.
So one of us is going to have to figure out a palate cleanser.
I think that's going to be you.
No, I don't think so.
I was gonna do lobotomies,
Woof.
or you know, like the the Stanford Project.
The
Yeah.
Stanford Prison Experiment. That's
The
a good time.
Oh yeah,
experiment.
yeah. That would be an interesting one. Not so much a palate cleanser, that's for sure.
No,
No,
I'm doing
not a palate cleanser.
an assassination, so I don't know if that's a good palate cleanser.
I know what I can do. Let me do the time that in World War II, America thought that it would be a good idea to take thousands of bats and strap little napalm bombs to them
Oh my gosh.
and try to fly them
Yes.
over to Japan.
Perfect.
And then, like, the instant they opened up the cages, the bats escaped, dropped their bombs, and burned down the whole facility.
Yes.
That sounds good.
So there's all these
Yes.
dudes, like, wearing white lab coats on fire, running around, and it's pure chaos and pandemonium.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's, like, the entire episode right there. But there was a lot of other wacky stuff that America thought would be a good idea at the
for sure.
time.
You know, I give you a challenge, Ed.
Okay.
I want to challenge you at finding a palate cleanser that is the Wild Wild West.
So a funny dumpster fire from the Wild West.
Because I'm trying to find one that is from the West, like a Western tale,
Okay.
but it's not always a light and nice, sweet time.
Not always cheery.
Yeah.
in the Wild
That's
West.
fair.
So.
Well, we'll figure that out later. We should probably wrap
Yeah.
this up because I'm dying.
Yep, that's my homework assignment. So I've got you two coming up with episode, so I have a little bit of time.
Yeah, you got some time.
I
You
got some
this.
time.
I believe in you.
So,
Anyways,
alrighty. Well, we'll leave it at that. Thanks, guys, for staying on till like almost midnight. Actually, staying on till midnight. Deja, the next time I see you, I'll get you more coffee. So
I have to open tomorrow, so I wish it were
know.
tomorrow that I'm seeing you. But
I'll figure out something.
no. Thanks, guys, for waiting up on me. You're the best.
It's all good.
Anyways,
All right. Well, in the meantime, guys, keep it a hot mess.
Bye.
bye.